The skies above Karsh were not quiet. They trembled with the sound of warships passing across the broken surface of the moon world. Once, Karsh had been filled with rivers of light, forests that touched the clouds, and mountains that rose like shining teeth. Now the land was fractured. Its surface carried scars from battles fought over resources and forgotten treasures. High above those shattered lands flew a dragoness, her wings pale as morning frost. Her scales glimmered white under the thin sunlight, and her form stretched wide across the sky like a living sail. To the people of Karsh, dragons were guardians, beings who had endured for ages and stood as symbols of strength. This dragoness, rare and albino, was respected even among her kind. She carried not only herself but also her most precious treasure, her child. Clutched close against her chest, the small dragon hatchling peered at the broken world below with wide silver eyes. The child was too young to understand the meaning of war or danger, too young to know that hunters were already seeking her. But the mother knew. Her sharp gaze cut across the horizon, scanning for the ships that hunted her bloodline. Her wings, though powerful, had grown tired. She had flown too far without rest, yet she pressed on, for stopping meant capture. It happened in a single moment. From the shadows of orbit, a plasma bolt struck. The energy burned through the air, glowing with violent brightness as it tore into the dragoness' left wing. Pain roared through her body. Her wings spasmed, and her flight faltered. She beat the air with all her strength, but the wound was deep. The white sail of her wing split, sending her tumbling downward. The child screamed as the wind rushed past. The dragoness twisted in the air, trying to shield her hatchling with her claws. But the force of the fall was too great, and the child slipped from her hold. For one terrible second, the albino mother saw her young falling away from her, tumbling toward the ruins below. She let out a cry that shook the air, a cry filled with desperation and love. The ground rose to meet her. Towers of broken stone and metal rushed upward, their jagged edges like the teeth of a trap waiting to close. With every beat of her wings, the dragoness tried to slow her fall, but the damage was too much. Her wings were no longer sails of strength, they were torn, useless fabric against the storm of gravity. She struck the side of a ruined tower, stone exploding into dust as her massive body tore through the structure. Her cry echoed again, louder this time, reaching across the empty fields of Karsh. She crashed into the ground with a thunderous impact that shook the nearby ruins, sending clouds of ash and dirt into the air. Pain consumed her. Her wings lay shattered against the ground, twisted and broken. Her claws dug into the soil as she lifted her head, searching the sky. Where was her child? She blinked against the dust and saw only fragments of broken buildings and the endless gray of the land. Her heart pounded in terror. Her hatchling was alone somewhere in the ruins, small and helpless. Above, the warships circled. Their lights blinked like cold stars against the thin clouds. They had struck their prey, but they were not finished. The dragoness could feel their eyes upon her. They did not want her death. They wanted what she carried, her bloodline, her child, the secrets hidden within the rare white scales of her kind. With strength born of desperation, the dragoness tried to rise. Her body trembled, and her wings refused to move. She stumbled forward, dragging her wounded form across the rubble. Each step left a trail of white blood upon the stones. She ignored the pain. She ignored the ships. She thought only of her child. The hatchling had fallen far. The mother knew this. She felt the bond between them pulling her forward, guiding her through the wreckage. Yet she also knew she could not reach the child before the hunters did. For the first time in her long life, She feared not for herself but for the little one she loved. She lifted her head once more and let out a call, a cry that rang through the broken lands of Karsh. It was a plea, a prayer to the silent world around her. If there was anyone, anything, that could hear her, she begged them to protect her child. The sound faded into the ruins, carried by the wind. The Dragoness bowed her head, tears of fire burning in her eyes. Her strength began to fade, but her spirit refused to break. She would crawl, she would fight, she would do anything to reach her child. Far below, among the shadows of the towers, a pair of human eyes opened at the sound of the cry. The man who heard it did not yet know that his life was about to change forever. The ruins of Karsh had grown silent after centuries of conflict. The wind carried dust through broken towers, and shattered streets stretched out like scars across the land. Life clung weakly here, hidden in shadows and forgotten corners. For most, Karsh was nothing but a graveyard. Yet in this graveyard, one human walked. His name was Marin. He wore a long coat stitched from scraps of fabric, and a pack of tools hung at his side. His boots were worn thin from miles of wandering, and his hands were marked with cuts from scavenging among broken metal and sharp stone. For many, Karsh was a place to avoid, but for Marin, it was home. He had learned to survive among ruins, taking what little he could from the bones of the past. Marin was not strong in body, nor armed with the great weapons of alien empires. He carried only a rusted rifle he had repaired countless times and a blade made from steel scavenged from the wreckage. But he had something that no machine could replace. He had patience and will. Where others saw only danger, Marin saw paths to survive. On that day, as he picked his way through the shell of an ancient building, he heard something strange. It was a sound that shook the air, a cry unlike anything he had heard before. It was deep, filled with sorrow and power. It made the dust above him tremble, and even the broken walls seemed to lean closer to listen. Marin froze. He had lived long enough to know that sound did not belong to any storm or machine. It belonged to something alive, something massive. He looked toward the sky through a hole in the roof and saw dust rising in the distance. His first thought was danger, but something in the sound of that cry told him more. It was not only power. It was pain. Curiosity pulled him forward. Moving with care, Marin crossed fallen beams and broken bridges. He kept his rifle close, his steps silent as he made his way toward the echo. The ruins around him grew darker, the towers taller, as if he were entering the very heart of Karsh's sorrow. Then he stopped. His eyes widened at the sight before him. In the rubble of a collapsed tower lay a creature unlike any he had seen. Its wings stretched wide but torn, its scales pale and shining even beneath layers of dust. A dragon. He had heard stories of them, whispered in trading posts and old tales, but never had he believed he would see one. This one was wounded, her body broken from a fall, her eyes burning with pain. Marin stood in silence, his breath caught in his chest. He knew at once this was not the source of the cry he had followed. The dragon's lips were still, her body heavy with struggle. The cry he had heard must have come earlier. He stepped closer but kept his distance, for even a wounded dragon could end his life in a heartbeat. Then he noticed movement. From the corner of his eye, he saw something small among the ruins. Half buried under dust and stone was a shape no larger than a goat. Its wings were small, its body soft, and its silver eyes stared at him with fear. It was a hatchling. The child of the Dragoness. Marin's heart struck hard against his ribs. He looked from the massive mother to the tiny child. The child was injured, a wing bent awkwardly, its breathing quick and shallow. The Dragoness, trapped in her pain, had not reached her baby. For a long moment, Marin did not move. A voice inside him whispered to turn back. This was not his fight. To step closer was to step into danger, perhaps even death. Yet another voice, stronger than fear, told him he could not leave the child there. He thought of his own childhood, of the times he had been alone, left to fend for himself in a broken world. He remembered the feeling of hopelessness, of waiting for someone who never came. Marin moved. Carefully, he lowered himself to the hatchling's side. His hands shook, but his eyes remained steady. The small dragon whimpered as he reached out. Slowly, he brushed the dust from its face, his touch gentle. The hatchling blinked at him, confused by the presence of this thin, fragile human. I will not hurt you, Marin whispered, though the child could not understand his words. His tone was calm, steady, like one would use to comfort a frightened friend. He lifted the hatchling into his arms. Its body was warm, its scales smooth, and its heart beat quick against his chest. The weight was heavier than he expected, but he tightened his hold. The hatchling cried softly, then rested against him as if it felt the truth of his promise. The Dragoness, lying broken in the distance, raised her head. Her eyes locked on him. Marin froze, his breath sharp. The great creature watched him, her gaze burning with fire, yet she did not strike. Instead, her eyes flickered with something else: hope. She had seen her child fall, had feared it lost, and now she saw a stranger holding it with care. Marin stood tall, the hatchling in his arms, the ruined city around him. He knew the danger was not over. Above, the shadow of ships moved across the sky. The hunters had not gone. They would return for the child, for the mother, for the secrets of the dragon bloodline. But in that moment, Marin felt no fear. He felt a purpose he had not known before. The ruins of Karsh had always been empty, but now they carried a new weight. A human had found a dragon's child, and nothing in the galaxy would take it from him. The skies above Karsh grew darker as the warships circled. Their sharp shapes cut across the thin clouds, their engines burning trails of light behind them. These were not ships of peace. They belonged to raiders, men and women who lived by seizing what was not theirs. To them, the Albino Dragoness and her child were treasures of rarest kind. The child's bloodline carried whispers of ancient knowledge, power that could shape worlds. Such a prize could not be ignored. Marin, holding the hatchling close, looked upward as shadows swept over the ruins. The child stirred in his arms, pressing its face against his chest. He could feel its fear, the way its small body trembled. His own heart pounded, but his mind was steady. He knew the raiders would not wait long. They had seen the Dragoness fall, and soon they would come to claim what they thought belonged to them. He crouched behind a broken wall and listened. The hum of ships lowered, growing louder as they descended. Dust rose from the streets as the first raider craft touched down. Its metal hull gleamed with scratches from old battles, and its doors hissed open with a sharp release of air. Figures poured out, armored and armed with rifles that glowed with energy. Their steps were heavy, their voices harsh as they spread through the ruins. The Dragoness lifted her head, her white eyes blazing with anger. She tried to rise, but her wings betrayed her. Her body shuddered, forcing her back to the ground. She let out a low growl, her throat burning with the will to protect, but her strength was not enough. The raiders laughed when they saw her struggle. To them, she was already beaten prey. Marin pressed his back against the wall, clutching the hatchling tighter. His mind raced. He had no army, no powerful weapons, no allies. He had only his rifle, his blade, and the knowledge of these ruins he had walked for years. Yet he also had something greater than steel or numbers. He had resolve. He would not let the child fall into the hands of raiders. The first group of raiders moved into the ruins, their eyes scanning for the hatchling. They carried nets of steel chain, designed to capture without killing. Marin waited until they stepped closer. Then he moved. From his pack he pulled a small device, one he had built from scraps long ago. A trap of wires and shards of glass. With a flick, he tossed it across the rubble. It struck the ground and burst in a flash of light and sound. The raiders staggered, covering their eyes. Marin seized the moment. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot cracked through the air, striking one raider's weapon and sending sparks flying. The hatchling cried at the noise, but Marin held it steady with one arm while he fired with the other. He did not aim to kill. He aimed to drive them back, to delay them. Each shot forced them to take cover, giving him time to retreat deeper into the ruins. The raiders shouted, their voices echoing against the towers. They spread out, their boots pounding against the stone. More ships landed, and more figures emerged. The ruins filled with movement, the hunters closing in from all sides. Marin ducked into an old passage, his breath sharp in his chest. He set the hatchling down for a moment and touched its head gently. "Stay quiet," he whispered, though he knew the child did not understand his words. Still, the tone calmed the hatchling, who pressed its small wings close to its body. He scanned the passage. The ruins were full of hidden paths, tunnels built by those who had once lived in Karsh. Marin knew them well. He had mapped them in his mind over years of wandering. Now they would serve him not for survival alone but for defense. He set more traps as he moved. A pile of loose stone rigged to collapse, a broken pipe ready to release a burst of steam, wires stretched across narrow openings. Each step he took, he prepared the ruins to resist the intruders. The raiders had strength in numbers, but Marin had the city itself. Above, the Dragoness cried again, her voice heavy with despair. The raiders turned toward her, eager to finish the hunt. But Marin's shots rang out from the shadows, forcing them to divide their attention. He knew he could not defeat them all, yet he did not need to. He needed only to delay them long enough for the child to live. The chase stretched on. Raiders stormed through the passages, only to be caught by falling stone or blinding bursts of steam. They cursed the human who stood in their way, a lone figure daring to challenge an army. Marin carried the hatchling through the darkness, his steps guided by memory. His arms burned from the weight, his lungs ached from the dust, yet he pressed on. The child looked up at him with wide silver eyes, and in that gaze he found strength. At last he reached a deeper chamber of the ruins, a place where light barely touched the ground. He set the hatchling down gently and raised his rifle toward the entrance. He knew the raiders would come. He knew the fight was not finished. But he also knew one truth: he would not move aside. The ruins of Karsh had seen many battles, but on that day, they bore witness to something different. A human stood between a dragon child and those who would take it. He was no soldier, no hero of legend, but his resolve burned brighter than the weapons of his enemies. And for the first time in centuries, Karsh's silence carried not only sorrow but defiance. The chamber where Marin hid was dark and heavy with dust. Broken beams leaned across the stone floor, and the air smelled of old ash. He crouched low, his rifle steady in his hands, while the dragon hatchling huddled beside him. Its eyes glowed faint silver in the shadows, wide with fear but also curious. The child pressed its small body against his leg, seeking comfort in the warmth of the only figure who had shown it kindness. Marin listened. From the passages above came the sound of boots and voices. The raiders were spreading through the ruins, their shouts echoing like thunder. They had numbers. They had weapons built for war. But Marin had something they could not understand. He had patience, and he had a reason to fight. The first raider stepped into the chamber. His armor glowed faintly with blue lines, and his weapon hummed with energy. He did not expect a challenge. To him, this was only a place to claim prey. But the moment his foot crossed the floor, a wire snapped beneath his boot. The trap Marin had set came alive. Stones fell from above, striking the raider's shoulder and helmet. He staggered, losing balance. In that instant Marin fired. His shot struck the weapon in the raider's hands, breaking it with a shower of sparks. The man fell back, shouting in anger, and others rushed to pull him away. The hatchling cried out at the noise, pressing closer to Marin. He placed a hand on its back, steadying it, his voice calm. "Stay quiet, little one. We will not let them take you." More raiders entered, cautious now. They spread apart, their eyes searching the shadows. Marin moved quickly, shifting behind a pillar of broken stone. He fired again, his shot forcing them to dive for cover. He did not waste bullets on blind chances. Each round was precious, so he aimed only when it mattered. The fight grew tense. Bursts of light filled the chamber, the raiders firing into the darkness. Dust fell from the ceiling with every blast. Marin guided the hatchling deeper, keeping himself between the child and the enemy. His lungs ached, his arms trembled, but his mind stayed sharp. One raider, braver than the rest, charged forward. He swung a blade of glowing energy, cutting through the air with deadly force. Marin dropped low, dragging a piece of broken metal in front of him. The blade struck the metal, sending sparks flying, but did not cut through. With a swift motion, Marin pushed forward and struck the raider with the edge of his own blade, sending him crashing into the rubble. The hatchling let out a soft growl, tiny flames escaping its mouth. Marin glanced at it, surprised, but smiled faintly. "You are braver than you look," he whispered. Still, he knew the fight could not last forever. The raiders were too many. For every one he pushed back, two more pressed forward. He retreated deeper into the ruins, guiding the child through narrow tunnels that only he knew. His trap slowed the hunters, but they would not stop them. As he moved, Marin felt something stir within himself. He had lived years only for survival, walking each day with no greater purpose than to see the next sun rise. Now, with the hatchling beside him, he felt a fire he had never known. This was not about survival alone. It was about protection. It was about standing for something greater than himself. The raiders pressed closer. Their leader shouted commands, his voice sharp and filled with hunger for victory. "Find the child. The mother is weak. The prize belongs to us." Marin clenched his jaw. He could not let them near the hatchling. He moved into a wide hall, its walls carved long ago by the builders of Karsh. Pillars lined the space, their tops broken, but their strength still held. He placed the child behind one and raised his rifle once more. The raiders stormed in, filling the hall with shouts and light. Marin fought with every ounce of will. His rifle cracked, his blade flashed, and his traps roared to life. The ground itself seemed to fight with him as stones fell and pipes burst. The raiders cursed the human who resisted them with such fury. The hatchling watched in awe. Its small chest rose and fell quickly, its eyes never leaving Marin's figure. In those moments, the child began to understand something new. This human, though small and fragile, was no ordinary being. He carried a strength not of body but of spirit. At last, smoke filled the hall, and silence fell for a breath. The raiders pulled back, regrouping outside the chamber. They had not expected resistance this fierce. Their leader's voice carried again, promising they would return with greater force. Marin leaned against a pillar, sweat covering his face. His body ached, his hands trembled, but he was still standing. He looked down at the hatchling, who pressed its head against his leg. For the first time since the battle began, he allowed himself a small smile. "We are still here," he whispered. "And we will keep fighting." Above the ruins, the ships circled once more, waiting for their chance. The Dragoness, broken yet unbowed, raised her head to the sky. She heard the sounds of battle below and felt a spark of hope. Her child was not alone. Someone stood to protect her little one, someone unexpected, someone human. And though the galaxy saw humans as weak wanderers, Karsh would soon remember that within them burned a fire that no storm could put out. The night on Karsh was never fully dark. The fractured moon world reflected broken beams of light across its surface, so the ruins glowed faintly even under the shadow of ships above. Marin leaned against a cracked pillar, his rifle across his knees. Beside him, the hatchling curled in a small ball, its silver eyes half closed as it rested. The battle in the ruins had slowed, but Marin knew it was not finished. The raiders had pulled back to gather their strength, and when they returned, they would come with more numbers. He could hear their voices in the distance, their ships humming like angry insects as they circled. The silence in between felt heavy, like the pause before a storm. Marin touched the hatchling's head gently. Its scales were warm, its breath soft and steady. He felt his own exhaustion pulling at him, but he refused to let it show. The child needed him, and weakness could not be allowed. Far away, through smoke and rubble, the Albino Dragoness stirred. Her body still lay broken from her fall, but her spirit would not rest. She had heard the cries of her child. She had felt the thundering echoes of battle in the ruins. Something inside her called her forward, telling her that her hatchling still lived. With great effort, she pushed herself up from the shattered ground. Her wings hung useless, torn and bloodied, yet her legs still carried strength. Each step sent pain tearing through her body, but she ignored it. The bond between mother and child pulled her, guiding her through the ruins. Dust clung to her scales, but her pale form still glimmered faintly, like a star hidden behind clouds. Marin did not hear her at first. His attention was fixed on the shadows above, where he expected raiders to return. Then a sound reached him, low and heavy, like thunder pressed into the earth. The ground trembled faintly beneath his feet. He looked up, his breath catching as he saw a shape moving through the ruins. The Dragoness emerged from the haze. Her long body moved slowly, her wings dragging against the stone. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but also with fierce determination. She lifted her head, scanning the ruins, until her gaze fell upon the small figure of her child pressed against the human's side. The hatchling stirred at once. Its silver eyes lit up, and it gave a cry of recognition. It stumbled to its feet, wings flapping weakly, and rushed toward the great albino figure. The Dragoness lowered her head and let out a soft rumble, a sound filled with relief and love. Marin stood frozen. He had seen the Dragoness before from a distance, but standing in her shadow was different. Her size dwarfed him, her presence filled the air with power. He gripped his rifle tighter, though he knew it would be useless if she chose to strike. The hatchling reached its mother, pressing against her claw. She bent low, her great head resting close to her child, her eyes closing for a brief moment of peace. Then, slowly, she lifted her gaze to Marin. Their eyes met. Marin felt the weight of that gaze pressing into him. He expected anger, or suspicion, perhaps even a strike for daring to touch her child. But instead, he saw something else. Gratitude. The Dragoness had seen the signs of battle, had heard the cries of her child, and now saw the human who had carried it through danger. The air grew still. Even the distant voices of raiders seemed muted in that moment. The Dragoness lowered her head toward Marin, her neck bending until her crown touched the ground. It was not submission. It was a gesture of thanks. For a being of her kind, proud and unbending, such a gesture was more powerful than any spoken word. Marin felt his chest tighten. He did not fully understand the meaning, yet he sensed the weight of it. The Dragoness, ancient and mighty, bowed before him in gratitude. He lowered his rifle, his voice quiet. I only did what I had to. Your child was alone. I could not turn away. The hatchling looked between them, its silver eyes wide as if it understood more than either realized. It pressed against its mother, then looked back at Marin with a soft sound. The Dragoness rose again, her head lifting high. She looked toward the skies where raiders gathered, her eyes narrowing. Though her body was broken, her spirit was not. And now she was not alone. The human had proven his courage. Together, perhaps there was still a chance to resist. Marin adjusted the strap of his rifle and stepped closer. He knew he could not fight an army alone, yet standing beside the Dragoness, he felt a new strength. The ruins of Karsh were not silent now. They carried the sound of an alliance being born in fire and struggle. Above, the raider ships prepared to descend once more. Their leader had seen enough. They wanted the child, and they would crush anything that stood in their way. But when they came, they would find not only a wounded Dragoness but also a human standing firm at her side. And in that moment, the galaxy's view of humans would begin to change. The ruins of Karsh were quiet for only a moment. The raiders, far above in their ships, had begun to regroup. Their eyes glimmered through the shadows as they prepared to strike again. The Albino Dragoness stood tall, her torn wings pressed against her back. Her gaze was fixed on the human who had saved her child. The hatchling nestled between them, watching, trembling slightly but alive. Marin adjusted his grip on his rifle, but he did not aim. The moment had changed. The Dragoness had acknowledged him, and that acknowledgement carried power. She was more than a creature of legend. She was a mother, a guardian, and now, she trusted a human. In all his life, Marin had never felt such weight in a glance, nor such responsibility. The hatchling chirped softly, looking up at both of them. It flapped its small wings, testing the air, eager but weak. The Dragoness lowered her head, pressing her crown to the ground in a gesture that could not be mistaken. To any observer, it was a bow of respect, of trust, and of unspoken gratitude. She had given him a place beside her, not as an equal of her kind, but as a protector worthy of honor. The raiders descended. Their ships glowed like sharp stars against the fractured sky, and energy weapons cracked with bright pulses. They thought the moment of hesitation was weakness. They did not know that a new alliance had formed in the shadows of Karsh. Marin moved carefully, placing himself slightly ahead of the hatchling. He could see the raiders preparing their lines, ready to flood the ruins. Yet he felt no fear. His heart beat fast, but his spirit was calm. The Dragoness shifted her massive body, her claws scraping against stone. Sparks flew from the ruins as she flexed her wings despite the damage. Her white scales caught the faint moonlight, and even in her pain, she was a force of nature. The first wave of raiders entered the ruins, rushing with confidence. Marin fired, his shots precise. Energy sparks scattered as his bullets struck weapons and armor. The Dragoness roared, a sound so deep it shook the broken walls. Flames escaped her mouth, not to destroy the child but to warn the raiders. Her roar carried the message clearly: any who dared touch the child would face her fury. The hatchling joined in, flapping its tiny wings and releasing sparks from its own small flames. Though weak, it demonstrated courage. The raiders faltered, surprised by the coordination of the mother and child. They had expected an easy victory, yet they faced a human who had already proven himself capable and dragons who refused to yield. Marin shouted to the Dragoness, his voice firm and clear. "We will not let them take her. We stand together." The Dragoness looked at him, her eyes softening. She did not speak. Her kind rarely used words with humans. But her gaze, her stance, and the soft rumble of her throat were all understanding. She would fight, and he would fight beside her. Together, they formed a spark of resistance no raider had expected. The battle continued, but the ruins themselves seemed to favor the defenders. Marin guided the hatchling and the Dragoness through narrow passages and hidden corridors, places the raiders could not reach easily. He used every trap he had prepared, every scrap of knowledge from years of wandering the ruins. Stones fell, energy pulses misfired, and raiders tripped over hidden wires. The Dragoness moved with renewed determination. Each step was careful but powerful. She pressed forward, her eyes never leaving her hatchling. Flames burst from her mouth, warning the raiders to stay back. They did not fully understand the bond between the creatures and the human. They thought strength was only in numbers and weapons, but here was proof that courage and loyalty could match any army. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The raiders' energy began to fade as the trap slowed them, as the Dragoness and hatchling worked together, and as Marin's shots kept them from gaining ground. The child, once trembling and scared, now glimmered with pride and curiosity. It looked at Marin as if it understood fully that he had saved its life. The sky began to lighten slightly, the first beams of a new sun reflecting off the broken towers. The raiders, frustrated and weary, retreated to their ships. They had not expected resistance this strong from a single human and 2 dragons. They cursed and shouted, but the alliance below remained unbroken. Marin lowered his rifle. The hatchling ran to its mother, pressing against her scales. The Dragoness looked at him one last time, her eyes filled with gratitude and acknowledgement. In that silent moment, the ruins of Karsh held a story that would not be forgotten. A human had stood beside dragons and proven that courage, loyalty, and willpower could ignite change. Above the ruins, the raider ships moved away, but the spark had been lit. The galaxy would remember this day, not as a victory for raiders, but as the day humans had begun to rise in ways no one expected. Marin, the Albino Dragoness, and her hatchling had become more than survivors. They had become a symbol of hope, of courage, and of the strength that could unite worlds. And in that quiet moment, the Dragoness pressed her crown to the ground again, her gesture stronger and more meaningful than ever. She had recognized a human's heart and welcomed him into a bond that would shape the future of Karsh, and perhaps the stars beyond. The ruins of Karsh were quiet once more. The first light of the new sun touched the broken towers and shattered streets, turning dust into a faint golden glow. Marin stood among the rubble, the hatchling pressed against his side, and the albino dragoness behind them, her white scales gleaming faintly in the morning light. The raiders had retreated, but their presence still lingered in the air like smoke after fire. Marin knew they would return someday, or others like them would come seeking the dragon's bloodline. Yet for the first time, he did not feel fear. He had survived battles, traps, and overwhelming odds. He had the trust of a dragoness and the gratitude of her child. That alone was more powerful than any weapon. The dragoness lowered her head to the hatchling, nudging it gently. The child chirped, flapping its small wings, testing the air, and then returned to press against Marin's leg. He smiled, feeling warmth spread through his chest. The little creature had survived, and they had all survived together. Marin stepped closer to the dragoness. He raised his hand slowly, unsure how a human should greet such a powerful being. The dragoness lifted her eyes, white and deep, fixed upon him. She lowered her massive head in a final gesture of trust and gratitude. No words passed between them. There were no gestures for humans in her kind, only understanding. But Marin felt it clearly. She was acknowledging him as a protector, as an ally, as one who had earned respect through courage. The hatchling let out a soft cry, then flapped its tiny wings toward the sky. Marin followed its gaze. Somewhere, beyond the shattered mountains and across the stars, the signal of their survival would reach others. Humans had long been scattered across distant worlds. Some were forgotten, some were feared, and many were considered extinct. Yet this moment would change everything. Marin knew that Karsh could not be their home forever. The ruins were too broken, the raiders too many. But the dragoness had survived, and the child had survived. Together, they could leave the fractured world behind and find a place where they could heal, grow, and rise. The dragoness shifted her wings, testing them gently. Though torn and scarred, they held some strength. She flexed, stretching carefully, and Marin could see that the pain was still there, but her spirit was unbroken. She lowered herself to the ground in front of him, inviting him to move with her. Marin took a deep breath and stepped forward. He placed the hatchling carefully on the ground. It looked between him and its mother, unsure which side to follow. He smiled and motioned toward the dragoness. The child hesitated for only a moment before rushing to her. Marin followed, walking slowly as the dragoness moved carefully across the ruins. When they reached the edge of the broken cliffs, the dragoness paused. She looked at the horizon, the fractured moons and distant stars shimmering faintly. Then, with a powerful push, she lifted into the air. Her wings, though damaged, carried her forward with strength and grace. The hatchling followed, flapping weakly but determined to keep up. Marin watched them rise, feeling a mixture of awe and hope. The sight was unlike anything he had ever seen. A human and two dragons, bound by trust and courage, rising together over a broken world. He realized that they were not only surviving, they were changing the story of the galaxy. He lifted his hand in farewell, though the dragoness did not need it. She had already understood. Her eyes met his one last time, and in that gaze, he felt the promise of something greater. They would live, they would grow, and someday, others like them would follow. The hatchling chirped loudly, flapping its wings to gain height. The dragoness roared, not in anger, but in triumph. Their flight carried them across Karsh's broken lands, leaving the ruins behind. Marin stood alone for a moment, the wind stirring his coat, and then he turned toward the hidden tunnels below. The galaxy was wide, and he would find a path to follow them. In distant worlds, Scattered humans heard the faint signal, a pulse of energy and hope that traveled across the stars. Some thought it was myth, others a warning, but all felt the weight of its meaning. Humanity had survived. A new chapter was beginning. Marin took one last look at the rising sun over Karsh, feeling the warmth on his face. He knew the Dragoness and her child were out there, soaring toward freedom. He knew the raiders would return, but they would not find weakness. Together, humans and dragons had formed something new, a bond stronger than fear, stronger than weapons, stronger than any empire. As the light spread across the broken world, Marin whispered softly, "We are not alone anymore. We will rise." Above, the Albino Dragoness and her hatchling glimmered against the horizon, a living signal of hope. The galaxy would never forget this day. The age of silence was over, and the age of humans, of courage and of bonds that crossed species, had begun. Karsh had witnessed the impossible. A human had saved a dragon child, and in return, the Dragoness had bowed with gratitude. The spark had ignited. Across the stars, the story would travel, carrying hope, courage, and the promise that no matter how broken the world, unity and bravery could change everything. And so, with wings stretched and hearts determined, they flew toward a future full of possibilities, a future that the galaxy would watch in wonder for generations to come.